Eugene Bareman, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Nat, thanks for having me, boys. Stuck in lockdown. Nothing like a good podcast to kill a bit of time.
It is Between Two Beers, but looking at it today, and for those that are watching on the YouTube, it could be between three beards. That's a pretty impressive piece of facial hair on you. Is that a lockdown thing, or is that just the look that Eugene runs now?
Nah, look, I always have a beard, but it definitely doesn't get any maintenance during lockdown. It just gets to run wild during lockdown. There's no point in keeping up appearances when it's only your closest loved ones around you. They know they know me warts and all anyway.
This interview is going to go all over the place, but we've canvassed a lot of your friends and colleagues and to think of interesting things to ask you. One of the themes that kept coming up was ask him why the cheese cutter is his preferred hat of choice. And I noticed you're wearing the cheese cutter today. So how come that's part of the look?
Nah, look, I've always worn caps my whole life. And I think just as I got a bit older, I was like, you know what, man, like I'm getting a bit old for the whole baseball cap, new era starter cap thing. I need something that's still kind of cool, but look a little bit more sophisticated for the older gentleman. So then I kind of came around. I was like, well, cheese cutter is quite a nice hat and still kind of cool, but fits in more with the older demographic that I'm now sitting in. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at that. Yeah, that's where it comes from.
It's a strong look. I like it. It might be part of my future. Eugene, we're in level 2 in Hamilton. Shay and I are sitting next to us. You're in level 4. You made the news recently about the sort of the idea of the camp you were trying to set up, got asked to disband. You've got 2 fighters with big fights coming up. What is the current situation on your level 4 lockdown and training fighters, and what's your scene at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, that lockdown bubble, which by our interpretation followed all the rules and regulations and laws, and actually by the police's definition as well, because we did have a lockdown bubble last time, in which they actually came and visited us in person and okayed it. This time, essentially the same thing happened. They came and visited us, but they, let's just say, the most politically correct way to put it is they've reinterpreted the same laws that they were using last time. And the reinterpretation meant that we didn't fit into that same criteria that we fitted into last time. And that criteria mainly being that we weren't, that wasn't our usual residence. And even though the law doesn't state usual residence, that's the police, what the police wording was exactly. And there's no argument there. It definitely wasn't our usual residence. We did get some lawyers' advice, and lawyer did say there is definitely some value in holding an argument, because you the definition of usual residence is very ambiguous. We were in there a day before the rules. We were in there one day before the lockdown. Yeah. In this house that I currently am at the moment, there was a time when I was only one day just moved into it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's we could have argued, but at the end of the day, there's like a greater cause here. And we're definitely in support of that. So we just we left, and it left us in a bit of a predicament. Like now, Dan's stuck at home training. I'm stuck here, and we made a choice also after where that bubble was disbanded, we made a choice to keep training, and we had that disbanded again. So whether that was the right or the wrong choice is a difficult argument, but all I can say is that I needed to consider Dan's health and safety, and I'm talking about when him going into a fight. I'm talking about the issue of him going into a fight unprepared, which is tremendous risk to your health and safety. And I had to weigh that up against the other health and safety risks of COVID. And given that we were from the very start already bubbled together, and given that the little bubble that we formed after were the exact same guys, I kind of like thought that risk that didn't pose a very high risk at all. I thought the higher risk was to Dan's health and safety if he wasn't prepared for the fight properly. But the powers that be didn't share that opinion, obviously. So then we were disbanded again. And now we're just forced into the situation where Dan's left training by himself, and we're trying to get out of the country, to be honest, because that's the easiest solution at the moment, is to get out of the country, get to the States where we can train together and there's no restrictions. But that's proving more difficult than we thought. The US consulate has been shut down for many weeks, but we're making some headway now.
Yeah,
there's a lot to unpack there. There's also an added complication of actually eventually trying to get back into New Zealand, which we'll leave for now, because that is fraught with its own challenges. I know from experience too.
But the way we start things at Between Two Beers is we like to tell the audience how we know Eugene. So Shay, you know Eugene Bareman?
First time to meet in person, but I actually worked with your sister in football. So Sarai was at Oceania Football. For those of our football audience that do know, she's the chief of women's football in FIFA, based over in Zurich. I tried to get hold of her this week to see what sort of intel I could get on Eugene. She's a very difficult lady to tie down. She was on a whirlwind tour of Africa with the FIFA Secretary General. She'd just been, I think, at the Beach Soccer World Cup. She's all over the place. But that's my loose connection to Eugene. And Stephen, I guess, through the media?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Shay last night. When we get a guest on, we go through a deep dive of what they've done, research them to try to think of the best questions. And he said, he's Sarai's brother, right? And I was like, no, what? It's like Bareman? Like, you mean like the boss of football in the world, basically? It's like, holy shit. And it added an extra layer for me. I mean, I love unpacking people at the very top of their field to sort of work through their family life to understand how they became such high flyers. And for you at the top of your field, her at the top of hers, I understand you've got another brother, Byron, who's a commander in the army. I'm like, wow, that family did something right. So yeah, I'll be quite interested to sort of unpack that as we go along. The place I wanted to start, though, is back in your high school days. So you were in the Massey High School first 15 and fifth form. And I've heard you say you weren't that truthful or honest with yourself then. I heard maybe there was an argument with the coach or a bad attitude and you dropped out of school and the first 15. But this is where things got quite interesting for me. And I'm going to read a piece from a really excellent profile the Spin-Off did on you, written by Michelle Langstone last year. It says, in seventh form, Eugene and his mother started a campaign to get him back into Massey High. and it took a lot of convincing the teachers. He declared he would give up playing his beloved rugby so that he could study full time, and that's when he realised the school didn't really care about his education. The heads of the school said he could only come back if he captained the first 15 that year. Bareman felt they were giving up on him, but he cracked on, inspired by one teacher who encouraged him to be the rugby player who surprised everyone by turning his education around. That year, he spent all but 3 lunchtimes in the library studying, and eventually the librarians opened up for him at interval as well. He also studied at night, and you're quoted as saying, "I had a really good system where I'd put a stopwatch on and I'd set it for 3 hours, and regardless of if I got my study done in an hour, I would work for 3 hours. I would stop the stopwatch if I got something to eat and restart it when I studied. I did that almost the entire year." And the punchline being, and then I got an A bursary and I went to law school, which sounds like an incredible turnaround. And it also seems like the perfect illustration of your whole approach to life. You set your mind to something and stop at nothing to achieve it. Can you talk to us about that period of your life and perhaps the change that you created over those 2 years?
Yeah. I mean, that was that year that I tried to go to high school and they wouldn't, or college, and they wouldn't let me, was basically the turning point of my life, really. I definitely wasn't. I wasn't like a bad kid. I've got a very good family, good parents, and you know, my mum and dad definitely would kick my ass if I was a bad kid and bring me into line. But I wasn't. I did like to live a little bit on the fringe. So you know what I mean. So I wasn't like a really, really bad kid. I wasn't a really, really good kid. I kind of lived on the fringe. I did some bad things, and then I made up for it by doing some good things. So I was right in the middle there. And yeah, I mean, all of my early education was, I mean, how do I put it? Like, it was a non-education, really. I honestly went to school just to eat my lunch and play rugby, coming from a big rugby family, sports family. And I filled my time up with that. And then obviously the obvious problems that come with falling behind in an academic system where you just can't fall behind. Doesn't cater for people once you fall behind. Once you're behind, you're stuck. And it becomes very, very hard for you to catch back up. And then it just perpetuates the problem. And then I just fell further and further behind. And then I eventually just reached a place where I was just only coming to school literally to play rugby and spend time with the boys and eat my lunch. So really the backstory behind that, the only thing you didn't mention is when I was basically asked to leave, when I was basically told not to come back to school because I was just wasting resources and time. I looked in the newspaper for a job, and that's what scared me, if you like, motivated me, but scared me at the same time about my future. Because in what they call the Western Leader, which is the local paper up in Auckland, that's where you used to find jobs, not on Trade Me or the internet back in the day. Yeah, I went through the list of jobs that I could, with what qualifications I had, which was little to none, what I could apply for and possibly do. And there's just, without insulting a lot of people that do these professions, there was just a whole lot of jobs there that just had a ceiling, if you know what I mean. You know, working at a fast food takeaways and things of that nature. Jobs that just had a ceiling. You could only go so far. And it just scared as a young 17, 18-year-old, whoever I was, it just scared the bejesus out of me. Like, I was just honestly, for the first time in my life, frightened about my future. And that's when I decided I needed to do something drastically to turn that around. And I wish I'd got that kick in the butt when I was third form, or year 9, they call it now. But I didn't get it till my schooling was over. So I had this really quick, I had like a year to try and turn it around. And I knew it was going to be a monumental task. I had also the added motivation. I think this was a very important part of it, of the school at that time forcing me to play rugby. And effectively saying, look, we don't believe in you academically, but you see, you're forcing our hand. We have to let you back into the school somewhat. We're going to get some productivity out of you, so you have to play rugby. Which even at the time, and we're looking back now, I think it's an insane, like that's insane. Like you couldn't do that now. Like if you did that, and nowadays that'd be like, that'd make the news, you know, like you couldn't force a kid to do that. But this was obviously a long time ago. And I had that motivation there, and that sparked something in me. And I knew I had to prove those people wrong. And then I just went about my task. But the most important thing I learned out of that was I could actually do anything. And I never really struck that chord before, where I thought if I put my mind towards something, I could do it. But what I got out of that was I realized if I put my mind to it and I put the right things in place, it doesn't matter what I want to do in my life, I can do it. It's just going to have to take, I have the capability, and it's just going to have to take hard work. That's the most important thing that happened.
I'm really curious. I'm captivated by the story, and I'm thinking back to my high school days, and there'll probably be people listening to this that are in high school currently. What was the reaction from some of your friends from going from, as you describe, I guess someone on the fringes, sometimes bad, sometimes good, to then transforming themselves into someone that's spending their lunchtime in the library? Like, did you get heat from your mates and stuff?
And how this is the thing. But this is the thing, though. Rugby players are the epitomized in this, like they're the epitome of where you can be if you're like a high school jock, like, and then to be the first 15 captain, that holds a lot of credence back in those days as well. So, all of that stuff, like getting shit from the boys, I had already earned my respect in the playground, I think, so to speak. So you couldn't come at me with that sort of stuff, because I'd already done my time, if you know what I mean. So there wasn't anybody that could kind of be like, man, well, what is he doing? Why is he in the library? What's he becoming? Like you couldn't do that. I had I guess that's one of the benefits to at that time to being a rugby jock. I had kind of earned my respect amongst the people that were going to kind of give you shit for trying to elevate yourself.
Did you bring anyone along with you? Like, did any of your mates go, actually, he's onto something here? It's not a bad option. Did anyone get into that library gang?
Nah. Look, everybody was on their own journey. I really stuck to myself. I knew I had to stick to myself. I knew I had to stay away from the lads. I knew the task in front of me, which was honestly basically learning everything from third form, because I was, like I couldn't recall stuff that I should have learned in third form. I had no prior knowledge of it. I had basically just withered away my entire schooling. The monumental task of having to learn basically 4 or 5 years in the space of one, I just knew I had to separate myself, from the lads, and just concentrate on this task that I had at hand, which I knew was gonna require an enormous effort. So Nah, the lads did their thing and I did my thing that year.
Yeah, I just want to just fixate on that 3 hours a day in the library just one last time, because it seems like not many people have that in their locker. Yes, you can be a bad kid, but deciding to get yourself straight and then have that discipline to do that. And obviously, Sarai, we've talked about like basically the top job in women's football and your other brother in the army. Are there any fundamental things or lessons or things from your childhood that you can look back on and think this is why we all turned out this way and this is why we all had this insane work ethic?
Oh, for sure. My mum and dad. 100%. My mum and dad are providers. They're providers. So they and they get that from their grandparents, from my grandparents as well. They I mean, and this isn't an attitude that's around nowadays a lot. It's not very prevalent nowadays, but they became parents, and one of their main tasks in life from that point onwards was to provide for their children everything that they needed. Now we live in a day and age where that is not necessarily always the most put at the top of the peak for a lot of young parents. But back then, that was my parents' main task, and they provided everything we needed to be successful. Now, what they also did, which I think was brilliant, is they gave us scope to mess that up. And what I mean by that is that they weren't regimented. It wasn't really regimented, like it wasn't like the military. They weren't super strict. They taught us right from wrong, but they also gave us the chance to make a choice between right and wrong and learn from our mistakes. And we made plenty of them. But what they did was they backed themselves. Really, they backed themselves. And what I mean by that is, once they gave us a scope, they were confident that the ethics that they had passed on to us was good enough for us to choose right from wrong most of the time. So, and that was ultimately that was their lesson. That was the lesson that they passed on to us, is they taught us the right way. They taught us what was right in the world. They taught us what was wrong, but they gave us the room to make those choices for ourselves and learn from it. And that all comes from my parents, who were great providers. All they did their whole life was provide for, and still to this day, still provide for their kids, their family, and their grandkids. And that's where it all comes from, really.
They did a fantastic job. So you then made it through 2 years of law school before the lure of fighting drew you away. How did studying to be a lawyer make you a better coach?
The process of going right back to when I having to get into law school, and that year trying to get into law school and then getting into law school, that process of understanding how to learn, how to put information in order, how to take information in, interpret it, put it in an order that I can understand, and then output it into whatever it be, whether it be like an essay or a speech or a exam paper or whatever. That is something that was foreign to me, that I had to learn. And that's what I got out of that. I got that understanding of how to take information in, interpret it, and then spit it back out. That's what I got from those. That's the carryover I got from those years of academic pursuit that still I use to this day, in a broad sense.
And then I'm really curious, like, because it's so foreign to me as well, law student by day, fighter by kind of in spare time. It's such an interesting mix of, I don't know how many, I don't have the stats on how many law students / MMA fighters that there are out there, but switching that mindset to fight. You mentioned your thirst for knowledge. Was it the same in the ring to try and work through those sorts of things?
No, absolutely. I from that 1 year in high school, I understood something that I previously didn't understand, and that knowledge was the actual power if you wanted to be successful. Not how much I was bench pressing or squatting, or how much my 3K run was, or how well I was performing physically. What I learned, and again, this is an overarching kind of thing, is that what's really important is how I'm bench pressing, how I'm running, what's the most efficient way to do it, what are the best techniques to use. I learned that the knowledge underneath it is actually what's important. That is what, and that carried me into law school, and then obviously in law school that became even more prominent. Law school is tough, especially for someone like me, and I carried on that thirst for knowledge into fighting. And what eventually happened was I went too deep into fighting, to the point that it started to seep into my academic career badly. And I knew this was happening at the time. That's the thing. I knew that the sport was taking over, and I knew it was taking away from my studies, but I didn't stop it. It's strange when I look back at that time. I mean, it's like an addiction. It's almost like an addiction. I could not pull myself away from fighting. What
was it about the fighting that was so addictive?
Oh man, just the whole first and foremost, the actual fight, like having the match and finishing it, and being victorious and having my hand raised, and just the battle. Like you can't, it's a real cliche thing to say, but you cannot replicate that anywhere in the world. In my experience, like, you just cannot. The feeling you get from going into battle with another human being is, I just can't. I can't replicate it. It's hard to describe, but it's addictive. But I also fell in love with all the other aspects of the sport as well, and I just couldn't pull myself away from it. And that ultimately, the sport kind of led to my, it's hard to blame the sport, but yeah, the sport and my own inability to pull myself away from it led to my downfall at law school.
Like we said, we've been through a bit of a Eugene Bareman YouTube rabbit hole over the last 48 hours, and we've watched a few of your old fights, and you're totally unrecognizable. You're clean shaven, and you had sort of a few different haircuts. I think there might have been a mullet or some
cornrows in there for a while as well.
But you look, from the fights I watched, you looked electric, like so fast. When you think back to, you had 48 fights. What were your strengths as a fighter, and what were your weaknesses?
Look, my main strength was probably my strength today as a coach was I tried to beat the person that I was fighting with the least amount of effort and by putting myself in the least amount of harm's way. And you did that through understanding the sport and the strategies and the tactics. So very early on in my career, I understood that there were certain ways to approach the sport that were better than others in terms of strategy and tactics, and I took that on board straight away. And that was my main strength, was being able to look at a fighter and be like, this is what I need to do to beat him, and with the most minimal amount of effort, and by putting myself in the least amount of harm's way. This is what I need to do, and that's what I set myself doing. Yeah.
And weaknesses?
Do you have them? No, but you know what I mean? Like, in all seriousness, like if you're in the fight game, I don't imagine that you'd ever think about, you probably think about things that you need to work on, but I don't know whether you look at that as a weakness. No, I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm just kind of thinking that Stephen asked the question.
No, I mean, a weakness, it's a funny thing. It's not like really in the vocabulary of fighting. Like you don't, like, you never highlight a weakness, or you never think of something as a weakness. You do, however, think of your opponent having a strength, being better in an area than you are, which essentially makes it your weakness, but you never refer to it as your weakness. So then you have a strategy, and you have different tactics within that strategy to stay away from his strength, so that they don't become your weakness, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I everybody has weaknesses. I had plenty. I mean, I felt I wasn't definitely the strongest and fittest fighter naturally. I had a really good work ethic. I mean, the way that I trained back then, I look back at now, and it was insane. Like, it was insane. Like, the amount of science and stuff that we have now, and the way that the sport's evolved, and the way that sports science has evolved. Man, what I used to do was absolutely insane. And in fact, it probably did nothing to help me physically. But I tell you what it did do is it made me mentally. It made me very, very strong mentally.
There's a lot to be said, I reckon, for that these days as well. Like, a little bit of that old school mentality would go a long way to some of the athletes across various sports that are coming through now.
Now that's the most difficult thing. Now, to be honest, to develop people's mental toughness is the most difficult thing. That back in the day was the easiest thing to develop. Nowadays, back then, you had no knowledge. There was no sports science, especially for a sport like ours. You just had to mash things together off whatever sources you could find at the time, and there wasn't many. The mental toughness side was much easier because you were doing stuff that was stupid, and you had to be tough to get through it,
and not complaining about it. I bet just doing it.
Nah, absolutely. Nowadays, things are very different nowadays. Nowadays, everything's monitored. There's like KPIs. There's all sorts of things you have to follow. And now I see some of the workouts that the boys are doing, and I'm like, it's like laughable. I'm like, well, what is that? Like, you haven't done anything. But then obviously I understand you dive a little deeper into it, and you understand the science behind it, and why there's so much rest, and why you're not pushing yourself, and why you need to recover. But then it becomes hard. Like, where do you pull the mental toughness out of? I mean, that's one of the challenges that modern day success kind of has, and we've managed to find a few ways to extrapolate that mental toughness that you need for the sport.
We had Eric Murray on one of our previous podcasts, and he talked similarly about finding that line between intense training and bullying and where it is in high performance athletes. Do you find that fighters, you're able to actually push them a little bit harder without fear of them breaking, just because of the mentality to get into the fight game to start with?
You can definitely, an amazing thing happens when you come across a bunch of individuals that participated in the sport for like a year, that don't just come and try it and then leave, for people that try to make a career out of it, whether it's professional or amateur. They come with a certain amount of resilience already, I've found, and mental toughness, so you can push them a little harder in some areas before they break. Definitely. But they kind of like, the sport is tough, and it kind of weeds those people out at the grassroots level. It's part of the reason why there's not big participation numbers in the sport, because you get weeded out almost straight away. There's no like tag rugby sort of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, ripper fighting. You can't just,
There's no tag rugby to ease you in. You just go straight in, and the attrition rate's high. But then what happens is you get a whole lot of these people come through that are really mentally very strong people already, for whatever reason, the way they've been brought up, their environment, whatever reason, they're just mentally tough, and they end up. So I do find with fighters, you can push them you can push them a lot, but it also makes it very tough, because you've got to challenge these guys, man. You've got to challenge these guys, and I mean, they're already a bunch of tough guys. It gets tough to challenge them. You know what I mean?
Just to close the loop on you as a fighter, 48 fights. You stayed in the game. You did 48 fights. Yeah. My records say that the last one was in 2013, which you won. But I've also heard you say that you want to get to 50. Why was that last fight the last one? And is there still an ambition to fight again?
No, it definitely wasn't 2013. It was only like 3 years ago or something.
Bad records.
Yeah.
Can't trust some of these websites.
Yeah. I fought many times after 2013, but rephrase. Sorry, what was the question again?
I'm wondering, the last fight, my records are all up in the air now. So I thought that you won your last fight. I was wondering why it was your last fight, and if you still have an ambition to get to 50 fights.
I want to keep fighting, and I feel like my body can still do it. Because I hate making excuses, so that I hate saying this, but I've just been so busy, like unbelievably busy, and I just haven't. And I have attempted actually to get myself in reasonable shape to get fit enough for a professional contest, and it's tough. It's tough to take on that workload plus the workload I already have. I found it very tough. What's kind of becoming my reality really is, if I really want to do that, I would have to take time away from other areas of my life, like training the guys, or and that's just not an option. I cannot just not train the guys like those guys just they need me. We need each other. The team needs that. That's how those guys are making a living. Like I just can't decide, hey guys, I'm having 3-6 months off. You guys do your own thing. I'll probably get paid $1,000.
Despite you saying that, are some of your fighters egging you on to try and get to that magical 50 number as well?
Oh, they are, but they also don't understand. Like, they need to understand this. Maybe they'll watch this podcast. I hope they watch this podcast and understand that now is the time in their life. They want to do it and go as hard as they can right now. Now's the time to do it. Later on in life, you get in a situation where there's just too much going on. There's too much people relying on you. There's other things that are just take more importance. They take precedent. And so now they need to do it. And so, and I also am acutely aware of this. So I know that I've got to be there for them. So as much as they encourage me, they don't understand that comes at an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
And, that they'll have to, they'll have to train and motivate themselves and do what they can, and they'll harp on all day how they think they can do that, but it's difficult.
I want to move on to Eugene, the coach now. So you started City Kickboxing in 2007. 14 years later today, you've been twice named UFC Coach of the Year. You've twice been awarded Gym of the Year. You trained 2 current UFC champions among a collection of other top names in the sport. You're widely respected in New Zealand and around the world. Has this whole venture gone better than you could have possibly expected?
Other than the 50 fights?
No, yes, it has gone better than I expected. But I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't expect this or something like this. I just, one thing I knew was we had this talent. I knew we had this pool of talent down here. And I just knew that if it could be pushed in the right direction, that it could do this well. Maybe not this well, but it could make a big impact. It probably ended up making a way bigger impact than I ever thought it was, but I knew it could compete internationally and be a big deal. Maybe I probably didn't anticipate this much of a big deal, but I knew we had the talent to do it. What I wasn't sure of when I surveyed all this talent is whether the part that I played would be more of a foundational role, like bringing up good fighters who weren't quite good enough to compete on the world stage, but we're gonna set the next generation of young fighters and good steed for them to become world-class fighters, or the next generation or so forth. Or whether I would be able to live and enjoy kind of the fruits of that labor in a more direct way with what's happening now. I just wasn't sure, but I did have that inkling early on, for sure. And I'm lucky enough that with the current generation and group of guys that are coming through, it looks like this could be something that might never ever be repeated again in the history of New Zealand combat sports. Maybe. Was there
a time or a moment when that realization of what is currently happening really dawned on you?
There wasn't one particular moment, but it was when Israel started to find had his first fight and found success, and then had his second fight and found success, and then had his third fight. Each success that Israel had just reaffirmed with me that we could be at this, we were more than capable of being at this world stage. And we had Dan Hooker already there, but he was kind of like he was a bit of an anomaly. He was in the UFC for 2 years before that, and then no other talent managed to find its way to the UFC at all. And so he was kind of an anomaly. But with Israel and him finding success, at that time, I knew that I had 15 guys that on any given day were beating Israel up.
Mm.
And then I saw the success that Israel was having. I was like, well, mate, look at this is crazy. I've got 15 guys that are beating Israel up on when Israel doesn't come in and he's sharp. I said, and that's when we started to be like, man, we just need to move. Let's just move these guys in this direction and just rapidly grow this as fast as we can, because we can have some of the best fighters in the world right now. And then we accelerated everything, and then everything just snowballed. Everybody started to believe more. We got one guy in, another guy in. They had success. They made the top 10. They made the top 15. They got a title shot. And then everything just perpetuated everything. Belief is a big part of it. Team culture, the culture grew, and now it's to what it is now. Yeah.
You spoke earlier about that kind of thirst for knowledge that you had. Once you got the team into the UFC, did that kick in again, and like learning the game behind the scenes? Because all we see, I guess, as fans and punters, we see what happens in the octagon. We see what happens in the cage. We don't see any of the stuff in the background. So given your background as well, you're coaching, are you learning the business of the sport as well, and how to maneuver and all that stuff that we don't see?
Yeah, no, absolutely. A part of the sport, I guess, that people don't see is that nowadays I'm probably spending more time studying the sport, the business side of the sport, the physical side of the sport, the mental side of the sport. I'm probably spending equal or probably more time studying that than I am like training the guys. And again, I know that knowledge is key, and I also know that knowledge, whoever is processing that knowledge and attaining that knowledge in the best way, in the most efficient way, is probably going to come out on top. And that's to be said about all high performance sport. And I've understood that for us to stay ahead of everybody else, we have to keep that thirst for knowledge and that process. We have to keep that going, and we have to make it better. And that's difficult. That is so difficult. Processing all that knowledge, acquiring all that knowledge, and finding the right people, getting the right people around you to help you through that. That is one of the most difficult things. That's almost becoming more difficult than the actual training of the guys. I feel at this point where we are now.
One of the stories our little insiders have asked us to ask you is the first time you met Izzy. I understand that maybe he was taking a bit of a beating, and there was an interesting sort of dynamic there. Can you share what happened there?
Yeah. So he how I first met him was he came to Auckland to do an MMA fight, and he was friends with a trainer at my gym. and this trainer was cornering him. But this trainer was a kickboxer. He didn't know anything about MMA. So what ended up happening is this trainer asked me to come along and corner Israel. And then in this sport, it's very difficult to do that because you cornering, you've got to know the person. To corner someone effectively, you've got to know them. You've got to know their strengths and weaknesses, mentally, physically. You've got to train them. You've got to know how they kick, how they move. There's so many things. It's just, and so it's not really a done thing in the sport to corner someone you've never met or trained. But I reluctantly agreed to do it, obviously to help my friend out. And then that's when I come across Israel, literally at the event. Asked him what he knew, and he knew nothing. He had actually had a couple of kickboxing fights, and in terms of MMA, he hadn't done anything. He had just watched YouTube, which was like, that's ridiculous. Like he went into that fight and he got taken down, and his lack of experience and knowledge just came to the forefront, and he got pasted in that fight. That was my first meeting of him, so it wasn't like it wasn't an impressive showing or anything. He's just a guy that came up and fought, who got pasted, who I probably should have never cornered because I didn't know anything about him. In fact, if I knew that he had that little experience and that he had watched YouTube for a week, I definitely would have said, "No, I'm having nothing to do with this guy." But, the universe puts you in touch with certain people for a reason sometimes. So however that happened, it was meant to happen, if you believe in that.
And then when was the next time you met him?
Yeah, then I don't know the exact time frame, but within 3 to 6 months, then he walked into the gym, and I recognized him from that fight, and I said, "How's it going? How can I help you?" sort of thing. And he said, "I've moved up to Auckland because he was from Wanganui, and I want to fight for you guys, and I want you to train me and stuff." And then I actually told him to look at some other gyms. I said, "Go and visit some other gyms because there's plenty of good gyms in the city," because I was based in the city, still am. And there are heaps of very good gyms in the city. And I told him to check those out and come back if this is the gym that you like. After you've checked out those other gyms, then you can come back. And then sure enough, after a week, he said, "No, yeah, I went and checked some of those gyms out, but this is the one I would prefer." And then I said, "Okay, let's get to work."
And then how long until you realized or could see that he had the potential to get where he is now?
We got him his first fight within like 4 to 6 weeks or something. And he did some amazing, athletically, physically amazing things in that fight. And then I was like, this guy's special athlete. But it didn't overexcite me though, because I just know that this sport is like, I had already seen through my years of experience, I'd seen amazing athletes like that come into the gym and leave and get chewed up by the sport 100 times. So I knew that you can be the most physically gifted athlete in the world. If you've got nothing, if you don't have the mentality to that you need to be a fighter, then you're not going to get anywhere. So I wasn't overly excited about what Israel had shown me in the fight because I didn't really know much about him mentally.
I've heard you say elsewhere that his career is almost the blueprint for how to be successful in the UFC. How much of his out of sport skills and savvy has contributed to his success and where he is now?
Look, the main thing. He developed a belief system, a self-belief system that he uses, and self-belief is one of the most important weapons you can arm yourself with in this sport. And he had that in abundance already, and then he developed it even further to make it even stronger. And that helped him get him to where he is. His personality, I mean, I can't take credit for his personality and that savvy that you're talking about. Like, because I don't know that Israel. I don't know that one. I know a different guy. So the guy that on social media and the guy in the interviews and stuff and says all this crazy outlandish stuff, and sometimes it's witty, sometimes it's cheesy, sometimes it's corny, sometimes it doesn't make sense. I don't know that guy. The guy I know is just actually a very normal Kiwi guy. So that's all him. That's something that he's I'm not going to say that he hasn't kind of artificially created that. Like, there is heaps of authenticity in that is like very organic, but it's not the Israel that I know. The Israel that I know is a lot different to that. What I mean when I say what I'm more speaking to when I say his blueprint, I'm talking about his development in fight sports. Like, that is a man that took his time to get to the UFC and learned the sport properly before he made the jump big leagues. And quite honestly, that doesn't happen a lot nowadays. Quite often, most fighters, 80% of fighters nowadays, they're learning on the job. And the problem with that is you're learning on the job at the highest level. So you get some very good fighters that jump into the UFC, and because they're learning on the job, they never get to show their full potential. So they get eaten up and chewed out early. Now, if that fighter had waited 2 or 3 years and learned the sport a little better, they would have been very, very, very successful. And that's one kind of insight, one sort of lesson that I learned, and I was able to apply to my guys. And that was move them in the right direction at the right time, which is why across the board I have quite a successful team. Doesn't matter which fighter you're looking at.
I'm going to put my fan hat on for a little bit and just ask you to take us inside a locker room on one of those big pay-per-views. What does that actually look like? You don't get your own locker room, right? All the am I right in thinking that the fighters are in there, trainers are in there, or have you got your own space?
Depends who you are, mate.
All right. So
yeah, Israel gets his own space, obviously. If you're the main event or the semi-main event, you get your own space. If you're further down the card, then you're in a locker room with everybody else, more of a communal locker room. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, you're in there with maybe 4 or 5 other teams, and the locker rooms are always very nice. These are some of the biggest and best stadiums in the world. So, you're talking about you're in the same locker room that the Lakers use and the New York Giants and whatever. It's always very nice. But is
it music? Is it music pumping? Is it like I can imagine?
There's music. Yeah. There's normally music going, and that's whoever kind of gets the stereo first. But you kind of like you give a little bit priority to the fight that's happening next, normally. So, if you're the next fighter, you kind of get the steer. Then they leave, and then whoever's next carries over. So, but the changing room, man, that's a special place. It's a I don't know. It's hard. It was a very special place. I don't know how to how should I best describe it? It's kind of like we all go there. And there's definitely a nervous tension when you're in there. And then what you're trying to do is you're always trying to like normalize that tension. So you got different guys who've got different roles, right? Like I put guys in the changing room quite intentionally. Like I've got one guy, Frank Hickman, our wrestling coach, who can't shut up. He's got ADD. He's always cracking a joke. He's always picking on someone. He's there on purpose. You know what I mean? Like I need him there to kind of normalize what's going on there. And then I do my part and pick up the pieces. Everybody's got a different role. But like I said, you're trying to normalize it as much as you can, but you're walking into to be honest, man, like to me, it feels like a life or death situation.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's what I'm asking. Like, it's fascinating.
Yeah. I can't, I shouldn't, I don't want to do a disservice by comparing it to going into like an actual battle, but what it feels like, the nervous tension to me feels like you're going into a life or death situation. It's just, you got your fighter and you got your team, and that's it. And you're all relying on each other, and you've all got each other's back. And the potential for things to go wrong is there, but you're just you're weirdly just trying to normalize that and just carry on like it's an everyday part of your life. But it definitely ain't.
a lot of coaches I've spoken to, or we've spoken to, who used to be former players, say that they get more nervous as a coach than they ever did as a player. I imagine it's a little bit different perhaps in the fight game, because when you're in there, that's got to be like a whole different world. But when you're coaching one of your fighters who's got a big career fight, it could make or break him, it could set him up. Like, are you more nervous as a coach?
I know, you're definitely more nervous as a coach. Yeah. I mean, as a fighter, I reached the stage mentally where I was not nervous at all. I completely. You got to have a little bit of nerves there because that's good for you. But I reached a stage where I wasn't nervous at all. I can't get there. I cannot get to that same place as a coach. It's impossible, because as a fighter, I knew I was in total control, and it gives you a sense of calmness. I knew that I'm like look, I train really hard. I put the best people around me that I thought could get me the victory. And then I kind of, at a certain point before the fight, I just resided to that fact. I was like, I've done everything I can. I'm going to go out there and give it my best effort. If I fall short, I'm fall short. If I'm victorious today, I'm victorious today. I've done everything I could. I'm in complete control of it from here on out. You cannot get that same comfort as a coach. It's just not. Yeah, it's just not there at all, because your control is it gets minimalized. Your amount of control you have is minimalized for obvious reasons. Yeah.
I'm gonna loop back to the locker room stuff, because coming from my background in football,
yeah,
that's where I do all my stuff, and I pride myself on making sure you've got back up this and back up that, and the song is the right song at this time. So I really resonate with what you're saying about handpicking the people that you have in there. But have you got any horror stories of if someone forgets something in the locker room before getting to the cage. Like I've got my own ones that I could talk for hours about them, but it just seems like the stakes are so much higher in a fight if someone leaves the mouth guard behind or something like that, which I could imagine could happen if you're racked up for it as well.
Yeah, plenty of stories. We've forgotten our pads. So the pads that you use to warm up fighters. So we've had no pads there. And then actually on this occasion, I remember asking, there was someone else in our changing room, and it was Paulo Costa. And at this time, this was way before him and Israel were ever fighting. He was the only person with pads, and I asked his coach if I could use his pads to warm up whoever it was that was fighting, right? And his coach was like, yeah, no problem. And then went to give me the pads. And Paulo Costa, recognizing who we were, he stopped his coach from giving me the pads.
Wow.
Yeah. You see, he was like, nah, this is Israel. You know, like you could see what was going on mentally. He was like, this is the enemy. Don't give them your pads. Which is like bit of a dick move. But I also understand that mentality as well, because at that level of the sport, that's the kind of mentality you have to have. So I also understood it at the same time. So yeah, another fighter of mine that I just started training called Tyson Pedro. He always wore a hat to the ring, and this hat was from a very good friend of his that had passed away. I can't remember, maybe he was in the military, and he bloody forgot his hat once. And I wasn't his coach then, but this story just went around, and that's also like it's a it's a warning, right? Like there's certain things you can't rely on and that you shouldn't rely on. Because what happens now that you forget that hat? And I can't remember how successful that fight was for him. But when you rely on things like that, it can be a trap. So I know, especially rugby players do that a lot. They have like socks and undies that they wear and stuff. But that mentally can put you in a bad place. And sometimes it's not worth the risk of having those little trinkets that you hold so much, esteem with.
The other thing I'm fascinated in is going into a break in a round and having to think about the instructions to give your fighter. You always seem, or you've seen from the last few fights that I've watched, very calm in those exchanges. Have you always been like that, or do you adjust your approach depending on your fighter, or do you try and normalize, like you've said, that kind of that minute or whatever it is in between?
That's more, I mean, from personal experience, and I had a great coach, by the way, which is part of the reason that I think that I'm able to be successful, is because I had a very good mentor, very good coach, and he used to come corner me, and we'd be in the middle of a fight, and we'd be in a difficult fight, and he would literally just be chatting to me like we're having a cup of coffee. And it brought a tremendous sense of calm to me. I remember being like going from this crazy fight back to the corner, and then I was like talking to my coach, who's just sitting there all calm, like nothing's even happened. And then I remember feeling, well, shit, nothing's, like, this is easy then. If you're not worried, I'm not worried. Like, if you're not panicked, why should I be panicked? That brought me a tremendous sense of calm, and I carried that over. And that's just my approach towards the fighters. most of the time, but sometimes it can be your weakness as well. Sometimes I feel when I look back and kind of assess, how I perform, I think sometimes I needed to be more stern, a little bit less calm, just so I could emphasize something. And because it's not my normal nature, not the normal way I did things, I haven't recognized that, and I haven't pushed it as hard as I should have. So it's generally how I coach, like being nice and calm and concise. But sometimes you have to break that mold, and you have to understand when's the right time to do that. So yeah, it can be difficult.
The other part I'm interested in understanding around that calmness as well, and it's one of the things as a support staff member in team sports that I've been learning is the reaction to a loss, and those around you that are or those support staff around you with the athlete, and how you navigate that, because that's a whole different kettle of fish as well, which I can imagine gets magnified in a combat sport where there aren't 14 other guys that are feeling that same feel. It's the fighter that's getting the brunt of it.
Yeah, that's losses are difficult. Losses are difficult, but I mean, first and foremost, you've got to check the health and safety of the fighter. We'll always make sure that's. But then, every fighter is different. Some fighters you got to leave them alone. You got to leave them alone for days, for weeks. Some fighters that straight away, there's some fighters they want to know what they've done wrong straight away, and they want to be working on it like immediately, like straight after they've lost. We're in the changing room and we're saying, this is what you should have done. Sometimes they want to just go through it. They want us to just show it to them physically, and they want to do it. Other fighters, yeah, they take it a little bit harder than that, and they just want to just go to a space by themselves. Everybody's different. I think the important thing is to let them know, and this is quite a common saying in my gym, that when said fighter wins, we all win. When said fighter loses, the same thing has to be said. We all lose. And letting them know and letting them know in a positive way, if you can understand what I mean, that we all are feeling the loss, but we're also all feeling the motivation to come back from that loss together. Letting them know that is very important. It's very important to let them know that we all lost and we're not disappointed in you. And let's learn, pick ourselves up, get better, and turn that L into a W the next time. But letting them know that the whole team's going through that, not just him. This is part of the reason why it's very. When you have, and especially in the UFC, when you have 4 guys fighting, 3 guys fighting, what makes it so difficult is when two win and 1 losses.
Yeah,
that's so difficult for everybody to handle. Because unfortunately, you just didn't get the job done. The job wasn't to get Israel a win and Dan a win and the third person to lose. The job was to get everybody a win. So it's a really difficult thing when you put multiple people on cards. On the other side of that, and this is why you see in different occasions where you've got 3 or 4 guys and they all win, part of the reason why that celebration is so ginormous is because we know, there's 3 chances to win, but there's 3 chances to lose. So if we can get all 3, it's we've accomplished our task. Yeah.
Are there guidelines like in other professional sports? You might win a game or a match, and the team goes out on the piss. They party hard together, but might take it a bit easy. They've got another game coming up. In the fight game, there's such longer gaps. Is there any instruction from the coach of just rein it in a little bit, or you just like go do whatever you want, come back into camp in a week, sort of thing?
Look, our sport is our sport suffers from the unfortunate predicament that you only get to participate in the sport every 3 to 4 months, because the sport's so taxing on your body. It's hard to kind of repeat the sport every Saturday, for instance. And so you get this tremendous kind of timeline where you have to sacrifice and do a lot, and you don't, and then you build up to this one event every 3 to 6 months, and you've basically turned yourself into a monk. The first thing you want to do is when you finish that fight, and it's why fights, combat sports, are quite notorious for their parties and the getting on the piss and stuff. It's because they've lived like monks for so long, and they haven't got like a rugby game every Saturday, like a rugby player or a soccer player or something. They don't have that continuous outlet. So you have to give them that time. You have to give them that time after that sacrifice. And I've learned that you definitely have to put things in place to make sure that safety is being adhered to, and people's health is being looked after, because it gets carried away.
I can imagine.
It gets carried away. Yeah, but I've learned over the years how to deal with that, and we have pretty good controls of it now. But you definitely got to let the boys let their hair down, otherwise they'll go nuts.
Yeah. One of the most fascinating and impressive things about you, and it's really unique to fighting, I think, is that we've covered, what you're like at the very top level with the UFC, but you also come back to City Kickboxing and you train. It would be the equivalent, someone said, of like Steve Hansen training like a third 15 high school rugby team. Like you do these things like Wimp to Warrior. We've had 2 people who we know have run through your program, and they've said it's just incredible. We've got the best coach in the world taking his time to improve us as these sort of office guys that don't know anything. And a lot of the comments have been that not only have you improved them physically, you've changed their lives, the lessons they've learned along the way. But one of the stories that caught my eye, and I was wondering if you'd be open to touching on it, is the university lecturer you coached for fights who was abducted one night getting into her car, and what happened with that.
Shit, I'm trying to. That's been shared. I must have shared. You've gone deep, my brother. You've gone deep. Now I'm trying to think where I even shared that. I wouldn't even know. But in the early days of the gym, I had a very dear friend of mine. I won't mention her name because she's a very private person, but she was an amazing fine arts lecturer, and she drew. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at a painting, a black and white painting, and looked at it and thought it was a photograph, like a black and white photograph.
Yeah.
And then you realize that that's actually a painting. Have you guys
Yes.
That's what she did. It was amazing. You would think that it's 100% a photograph until you looked at it closely and were like, oh my God, this is a painting. She could produce art like that. And and it was crazy because this night, I remember the night she got abducted, because that night there was a horrendous lightning storm, like I've never seen anything of the likes again. Continuous lightning all the time, and it was so bad, lightning and thunder, that it stopped the class that I was doing. We all stopped and we were like, oh my gosh, what's happening out there? And we all went to the window and were like, what the hell's going on? And this lasted for 2 or 3 hours. And then I remembered that. And then, so a week after that, a couple of detectives come to the gym and they telling me about, and they start to reveal to me about the events. And of course, I remember that night because of the lightning. I said, oh, that was that night. And then amazingly, not amazingly, but and that night, which was one of the worst in terms of weather you could ever think of, that was the night that this poor lady was abducted outside the university. She was, I think she might have been knocked on the back of the head and put into a van. And yeah, she was kidnapped and taken up to the Waitakere Ranges. And a horrific ordeal. I won't go into those details, but she eventually escaped. She escaped, and first of all, she had to wait. It was so dark, she had to wait till morning. So she felt like she could have escaped earlier, but she wouldn't have been able to see anything, so she would have injured herself. So she had the calmness to kind of think about that, to wait till first light. So when she was escaping, she wouldn't get tripped up by logs, wood, or whatever obstacles in the way. Then when first light happened, she put her the person who was kidnapped her into like what can you be described as like what they call a tie clinch, is where you grab someone over the neck and kneed them, and incapacitated them long enough for her to make a breakaway. And she made a breakaway, and she found a couple of walkers on the track, and then she was rescued. And she then eventually rehabilitated herself, and she did that through the gym. So she I say this with a bit of reluctancy, but she credited the training that she had done, because she had had a couple of fights, and myself and my business partner Doug with being a big part of the reason why she was being able to escape. In reality, it's a small part. In reality, her will to carry on and her will to live is what saved her. But obviously, we were very gracious, and we were very thankful that she attributed that to some of the training that we had done. And this lady made a full recovery and is living a happy life. And that's one of many stories I have from people finding success in their life through being touched by the gym in some form or manner. And ultimately, that's what I love. That's why I started this. I didn't fall in love with training UFC champions or UFC fighters. I initially fell in love with training just your everyday Joe blogs, some of them with amazing stories, because everybody's got an amazing story, and seeing how the sport could touch them and change them, whether it be a minuscule change or a massive change. Ultimately, that's what I fell in love with primarily. And then obviously the rest of the success happened. And that's why I still do that. That's why anybody willing and able that wants to learn, I will still take my time out to train them and give them some time.
Thank you for sharing that, Eugene. It's one of those things, I think, and probably more so in your line of work, where regardless of who you're training, there's an element of trust and there's an element of sharing that comes from those relationships. So do you take on all of those challenges that people are talking about? Do you have a way of separating yourself from that and using the sport to teach the lessons? Like, how much of a toll does some of that stuff take on you personally?
Look, I definitely bear the weight or feel the weight of a lot of responsibility for a lot of people. That doesn't have a negative effect on me. It has a positive effect on me. It means I have to up my game. I got Israel, I got Brad, I got Dan, I got these guys at the very top who are making a living and feeding and supporting their families and whatever ventures they have in the future through the sport. I have the guys who are just below them who are trying to get to where they're going and put all their eggs in one basket, and everything they want to do in their life is tied up with getting into the UFC. I have the guys below them who are your young amateurs who have come to the gym and want to become professional fighters, who see this as an actual career path. I have them, and then I have a whole lot of people underneath them who are just coming to the gym to exercise, get healthy, and a lot of them deal with some of the outside problems that they're having with the gym. I have to be aware. I have to be very aware of that. I can't. It's not. I don't want to say anything. It's not like a gym. It's not like Les Mills or Club Physical or anything. You can't just. People don't just come and swipe their membership and then leave. That's not why they come to the gym. They come to the gym because there's a community there and there's people that care. And so there has to be people that care there. And for a lot of those people, it's me and the other coaches. And so we have to do that justice. And it's just about managing that. It's just about managing that and not letting the weight of that bear down on you too hard. We have a very good success rate, and that helps. It helps when you're successful with all these different goals that all these different people have at all these different levels. And we've found a formula for success. We just have to keep building it and improving on it. Yeah.
Thank you. That took you to some pretty deep places, but hopefully that's what we're all about. I love the honesty and the openness about what that means to you. I want to try to take you to a bit of a lighter place, and I'm just going to pick around at a few little bits and pieces before we finish up. The Bushwhackers walkout. I've heard that on occasion that you might do the classic Bushwhackers walkout. Any truth to that?
There's no truth at all. At all.
Did you watch that stuff growing up? WWF? I'm down a rabbit hole at the moment through lockdown. I went into 90s wrestling.
Yeah, now the old stuff I used to watch a lot, like the Bushwhackers, the Ultimate Warrior, Hacksaw Jim Duggan. That old. I've never watched any of the new stuff for the last 20 years, but the really old stuff I used to watch. But I did the complete opposite to the Bushwhackers, to be honest. That's someone's taking the piss by giving you the wrong information. I walked out to classical music.
Really?
Very calm, very docile classical music. Because that's how I wanted to be for my fight. I wanted to be very calm and very kind of placid before the fight. So I actually walked out to the complete opposite of the Bushwhackers, I can imagine.
As serious as the fight game is there any kind of pranking, gym jokes, taking the piss out of people as well as the hard work?
That's all there is that goes on. There's no other way. There's hard work and just taking the piss out of each other. That's the only thing that exists. There's that's all we do. That's all we do.
Are there any good examples off the top of your head of your best gym prank that was a success?
I don't know. We've had many. We had the most recent one. Maybe we had we had an irate lady walk into the gym who had been cut off by a motorbike. Right?
Yeah.
And crazy. Like my professional fight team's in the middle of sparring, and she walks through the back door into the middle of it and stands amongst like 50 people and just demands to see this person who cut her off riding this bike. Little blonde lady, craziest thing I've ever seen. Had no fear, had no reluctance at all. And there was 2 bike riders in the gym at the moment. And and we all knew who it was. But of course we pointed him to the other guy who was innocent with the bike. And he's a very good professional fighter. His name's Bo Rawadi. And he got the heat of this lady. And it was the funniest thing to us because this lady just came down on him. And actually, to be honest, it kind of turned into something that was funny because this lady became so irate that she started to get really abusive. And then eventually one of the girl fighters had to escort her out and just let her know that this is not the place to be this aggressive against someone who's accidentally cut you off. So yeah, but there's stuff like that it's every day. Like this is how it's part of the culture. It's part of like you got to have a thick skin in that gym. It's part of what makes you mentally tough. You push the boundaries, give each other a lot of stick, play pranks on each other. It's part of what makes a really great culture in my gym, which is what we have at the moment. So if you could be a fly on the wall, it would be a very funny place to be. Trust me. That's why I don't have any flies on the wall, though. Because
I love that story.
You watch fight movies, you watch Rocky, you even watch some of those real life Mike Tyson behind the scenes, and they always credit the trainer, and you always kind of see the trainer as this, I don't know, like it's this, not a messiah figure, but it's a really key part to it. And to actually spend the time with you today to talk about and hear and understand the thinking that goes beyond just punch this guy, kick this guy, take this guy out. There's a whole layer to it that people that aren't involved in the fight game probably don't realize.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tremendous responsibility, right? Like you have to, like they have to learn this. Like these guys have to learn this from somewhere. And that's why, honestly, like sometimes in a sport like ours, like sometimes a person's career can be defined by what gym they walk into. And there's an unfortunate side to that, unfortunately, because if you compare that to rugby, for instance, right? You can start off with an awful coach, right? But you can still excel. And you will go to the next level. And at that next level, you're going to get a better coach because that's how it works. And then you'll excel even more. And then you'll get to the national level. And then you'll get a better coach who has national level credentials. And then you'll get to the All Blacks. And the All Blacks is the best coach that money can buy and knowledge can gain. and you've got the best coach. Well, one of the unfortunate things of our sport, we don't have that hierarchy. And you get Joe Bloggs, a super athlete, walking into a gym who doesn't have the best trainer, who doesn't put a lot of effort into it, who's doing it for the wrong reasons. And unfortunately, he suffers and he doesn't reach the heights that he can make. And some people don't understand. A lot of gym owners, they don't understand that responsibility that they have. Mm. And so it's a bit of a problem in the sport because we don't have the same infrastructure as some of the other sports. But it's also a problem that I'm, being in the position that I am, I'm trying to afford it a little bit of time and effort, trying to fix it, trying to upskill a lot of the other coaches so that, like what we talked about at the very start, so that this isn't like the peak of New Zealand combat scene ever, so that it can carry on.
Do you knowledge share from other sports? And can you glean stuff from other sports, or is it all quite institutional?
No, I actually do, but that's just through nothing official. Like, there's a lot of knowledge sharing that goes on in New Zealand sport through High Performance Sport New Zealand. Like, they have all these things set up for them. The way that I knowledge share is I just reach out to people, or they reach out to me. Like, the Tana Umangas and these sorts of people, they reach out to me. All the different provincial netball coaches and stuff, we talk to each other through no official avenues. I actually do a lot of my I learn a lot in the airport lounge. The airport lounge has been like phenomenal for me in terms of like learning about other high performance coaching that goes on at a national and international level from other sports. But it's all, you have to do it all off your own back, really. You have to do it all off your own back. But to be honest, it's going to change soon. Like, the amount of attention the sport's getting now, through the work that obviously I've done, but then lots of generations before me have done as well. You have to give it its credence soon. Look, this is an actual viable option that young Kiwi, because it's about promoting health, and it's about, you got to give young Kiwi kids options. Well, this is definitely an option. There's a generation of kids coming through now who aren't going to play rugby. They are not going to play soccer or cricket. They will 100% will have seen Israel and Dan fighting. Yeah. And that's where they're going to go. And so when you start to get that sort of response, she's slowly turning around, boys.
If you're in Vegas, are you getting stopped? Do people like want a piece of you as Israel's coach?
I get stopped by people in the scene.
Yeah,
definitely. Right. So people that follow the sport. Yeah, I get stopped in places like Vegas where there's a lot of fight fans and that. I get stopped, but I'm like, Israel is amazing, right? Because he has kind of transcended. So I get stopped by people that follow the sport. He gets stopped by people that don't follow the sport. So like that, like he's kind of like, when you reach that level, when you've transcended the people that are involved with the sport, that's crazy. But yeah, obviously in New Zealand, I definitely get stopped a lot. It's just something you kind of just get used to. The craziest place I got stopped was when Israel was only maybe he was just in the UFC or not in the UFC yet. I know he wasn't in the UFC yet, and maybe just Dan was, and I was in Ireland, and some guy just starts yelling out to me, and he runs up to me from we're in the middle of we're in Dublin somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and just has a full-on half-hour conversation with me about fighting because he had seen me coaching. and this was years ago. That the Irish, man, do they follow fight sports like no one else? Like they love fighting in Ireland. They love it.
That's been so great, Eugene. Shay, anything else? Any bit before we go?
I just want to commend you because I kind of, you seem to be in your early days a guy that shirked away from the limelight, and I think it's obviously listening to you and spending this time with you that thirst for knowledge, that awareness of what you're in. You've realized that you actually do have to come forward, but I think you've come forward with that authenticity as well. So it's been really interesting in this week of preparation to have a look back and then see where you are now, culminating in actually chatting to you today. So I guess that's a tip of the hat back to that 17-year-old Eugene that realized where he wanted to go and where he didn't want to go. So well done on all that success and that transformation as well.
Nah, thank you. In terms of my like personal growth and development, like this is that young 17-year-old or even that young 25, 30-year-old, this is as far from that reality as I could get. Just talking to you guys now, I was definitely a very quiet, very shy person. But yeah, one thing I'm understanding is we live in a brave new world, and there's advantages to being a little bit more outspoken, and there's a positive influence that you can have on people if you let them know your message and your story. That's what I think is cool. That's what I think is like, that's what I really enjoy when I'm sharing stuff like I shared today. I think that's the real positive side of it.
I've got no doubt that is going to resonate so well with our audience. Anyone who's made it this far is going to love it. So thank you so much, Eugene, for your time. We really appreciate it, and all the best for your upcoming fights and future, and hopefully catch up in real life sometime.
Awesome, boys. Send me the links and stuff, and we'll get sharing them. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.